This is the J. Scott Outdoors podcast on Western big game hunting and fishing, brought to you by GoHunt.com Insider. Research faster, hunt more. Go to GoHunt.com/insider and join today. I'm your host, Jay Scott, and I live and breathe hunting and fishing, spending half the year in the field experiencing God's creation. I hope you'll enjoy hearing about our adventures. Guys, welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have a great episode with Brody Henderson, who's a guide from Vail Valley Anglers out of the Vail area in Colorado. The shop is actually located in the Riverwalk Center in Edwards, Colorado, and you can find them at vailvalleyanglers.com. They've got a great website, and I've been going into that shop for 10 plus years. Used to fish a lot with a friend, Giannis Patelis, and they've actually gone through several name changes over the years, but the last couple years it's Vail Valley Anglers. It's a great shop. Brody's been a guide in the Vail Valley for 16 years. I know when I used to fish with Giannis all the time, he spoke very highly of Brody and his abilities, and it's a great area if you haven't visited it. Not only in the winter do they have incredible skiing, but they actually have phenomenal fishing with the Gore Creek, the Eagle River, the Colorado River, Homestake Creek. There's a bunch of good fishing, Piney River, all around the area. So check it out. You guys are going to enjoy this episode. Also, go check out Vail Valley Anglers if you need flies or buy Colorado fishing licenses. They carry Simms products, Patagonia, Sage, Fish Pond, Rio, and Yeti. And you can also find them on Facebook and Instagram. You guys are going to enjoy this show. We break down the Eagle River and the characteristics of the river. I want to thank you guys, my listeners, for all the support. I get constant emails at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. And text messages, Instagram messages, Facebook messages from you guys telling me how much you're enjoying this podcast, and quite frankly, I'm enjoying doing it. So it's a good partnership, and I just appreciate all your support. I want to remind you guys that you need to subscribe on iTunes, because if you subscribe, it's free. Everything's free. You're listening for free and subscribing for free. But if you subscribe on iTunes, as soon as I automatically download an episode into my Podbean account, which is my host for the podcast, if you're subscribed, you automatically get that to your device. So it's important. I have some people that say, when's the next one coming out? And, 12 hours ago, I had already downloaded an episode into Podbean. So subscribe on iTunes. You can also subscribe on Podbean. I think that I should make note that if you're an Android user, you go on my Podbean feed. If you're an Apple iPhone user, you go on the iTunes feed. So, and I believe on the Podbean account, there is also a link that you can use the iPhone app on your Android. So, iTunes app on your Android. So, so we've got that out of the way. I just want to thank you guys for listening, and let's get right to the show with Brody. Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Brody Henderson. I've known Brody for some time. He's a guide in the in the Vail and the Eagle River Valley. Brody's been guiding for 16 years in the valley, and I'm fortunate to have him on this morning to talk fly fishing, Colorado, and fly fishing specifically in the Eagle River Valley, which is near the towns of Vail, Edwards, Walcott, Avon. It's a beautiful area. I've spent a bunch of time in the area fishing and enjoying Colorado, and we're fortunate to have Brody on this morning. Brody, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Looking forward to having you on this morning to talk about fishing. I noticed it's the 12th of June as we record this episode, and I noticed we had big rain over here in the Roaring Fork Valley last night, and I see that the Eagle has jumped up to 3760, I think, overnight, coming up from, I believe, 2700. So, I mean, it made a big jump overnight.
It did, yeah. It's a pretty big leap, and we're not too unhappy about that because we kind of need that high elevation snow to start melting so we can get after some fish.
Yeah, it sounds good. Now, Brody, you're a guide in the valley for 16 years. You're with Vail Valley Anglers. Give me a little background, a little short bio on yourself, maybe how you got started out into Colorado, and what brought you to guiding in the Eagle River Valley.
Sure, yeah. I was living on the Front Range in the mid-'90s, working at a tech job down there, and I was coming up to the Eagle Valley area quite frequently to fish on the weekends, and was stopping in one particular shop, Flyfishing Outfitters, and I was there a lot, and they kept begging me to guide, and finally I decided to take a guide training school with them, and made it through 2 days of a 5-day school and started guiding on my third day. So that was 16 years ago, and I'm still doing it.
Yeah, and I know you're known as one of the best guides in the valley. When I first saw you, we used to fish with your friend Giannis Patelis, who used to be a guide in the valley, and fished with Giannis. My wife and I fished with Giannis for 5 or 6 years, and we would see you a lot on the river, and Giannis always had good things to say about you and how well you knew the river and how good of a fisherman you were. And so I want to pick your brain a little bit today on some of the different characteristics of the Eagle River specifically. I know the area has good fishing with the Colorado and Gore Creek and the Blue River and some of the different fisheries around. But today I want to talk specifically about the Eagle River. What is it about the Eagle River to you that is so special?
It's just a great kind of the ideal trout stream in my mind. It's definitely my favorite river to guide on as far as float fishing goes. Kind of an interesting thing about the Eagle is that in the late 80s, there was a mine spill on the way upper Eagle River, and there was very few wild fish in that river at the time, and the fishery was struggling big time, and they closed the mine and started cleaning things up, and the river just kind of came back on its own. And when I started guiding the Eagle, a 14-inch rainbow was a pretty nice fish. It was mostly brown trout. They didn't get that big. And now, just over the course of time, as the river's cleaned itself up, it's not uncommon to catch 18 to 20-inch wild rainbows out there. So it's a pretty impressive fishery that a lot of people kind of drive by to go fish some more well-known fisheries like the Frying Pan or the Colorado River. So we love it. It's our favorite stream.
Yeah, I've had some great days out there and enjoy the whole valley. Brody, take me through maybe from the start of the Eagle River up high, and let's talk, or let's break the segments down into maybe the Upper Eagle and then maybe down to STP through town there, and then maybe from from STP to Climbing Rock, maybe go through the river as you start from the top.
Yeah, no problem. The Eagle originates from a couple different branches up above Vail, up above the town of Minturn, as a fairly small stream up near Camp Hale, which is an old military camp on some national forest ground. It's a very small stream up there, a lot of beaver ponds. And up there, Homestake Creek joins it. It drops down through Battle Mountain Pass and joins up with Cross Creek just above Minturn, where it becomes a little bit bigger river. The fish are fairly small up there. They're doing a lot of cleanup in that stretch of the river now, and that stretch is starting to yield some bigger fish. But for the most part, it's smaller rainbows and browns up there. And where it really turns into a really good trout fishery is just below the town of Vail, where Gore Creek enters the stream. And Gore Creek is a small gold medal trout fishery in the town of Vail. So from Gore, the confluence of Gore Creek down through the town of Avon, it gains some volume and becomes a little bit bigger river. It's a lot of pocket water, a lot of fast water. We don't float up there. It's pretty technical. Some whitewater companies go up there and kayakers go up there, but we don't really float it. And it reaches the town of Avon. And again, it's still mostly pocket water, a lot of big boulders. There's some deeper holes. And it's a great fishery for wade fishermen between the town of Avon and Edwards. And there's some public access in there, some really good fishing. It's still primarily a brown trout fishery until you reach the town of Edwards, and that's where a lot more rainbows start showing up. And just below the town of Edwards is the Edwards wastewater treatment plant, and that's the first major public boat ramp where we start floating the river. And about 7 miles downstream from there is the town of Wolcott. And just below Wolcott is what's called the Climbing Rock BLM campground, where there's another boat ramp. We do a lot of floats between Edwards and Climbing Rock, and it's a very good section of river. Probably as far as fish numbers go, it's the highest numbers per mile of trout in the entire river. It's a pretty even mix of rainbows and brown trout, primarily wild fish. Occasionally you'll catch a wild cutthroat in there that drops in from a creek up above. And it is a really good fishery. It's a pretty mixed bag of public and private. So that's why float fishing it is a really, really good way to go, because you can float through stretches of water that you normally wouldn't be able to access wade fishing. So that's kind of our bread and butter float. That's close to the shop. We'll do a lot of half-day floats on that stretch. Once you get down to the Climbing Rock campground below Wolcott, the next stretch of river is a fairly long one. It's probably 10 miles or so down to the town of Eagle. And that flows through, again, a mixed bag of public and private, but we're fortunate that a couple miles of that stretch just went public. It's Eagle County open space now. So when you combine that with the BLM water in Red Canyon, which is a really pretty kind of cool area through that stretch where the river flows through this big red sandstone canyon, there's that stretch of public, and then below there is the Eagle River lease, which is a Division of Wildlife lease. So there's more public water access between Wolcott and Eagle. It's a fairly technical row through there. It's a lot of fun. But you definitely got to know.
There's one rapid specifically, Dead Cow, and then I guess I-40 rapid that can get your attention pretty quick. I-70.
Yep.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So that's a really neat stretch of water, and one thing that we're pretty stoked about on that stretch is the takeout used to be pretty basic. It's at the Chambers Park in the town of Eagle, and they just did an improvement on that takeout, and now there's a nice cement boat ramp there with an eddy. So we're pretty happy about that. That's a stretch of water I used to do a lot when I was the first 5 years I was guiding, and then we kind of got away from it because it became a tough one to do with clients because getting the boat out was pretty difficult. But now that there's a boat ramp there, I'll probably start doing it a lot more again.
So where is it, Brody, the takeouts, when you used to have to drive through the trees and kind of drop into the brush there in the rock pile, where have they created the concrete?
It's in the exact same spot. They just did a big improvement on it. So there's a big eddy there now and a cement ramp, and there's more room to turn around in there with a trailer. So it's going to be pretty cool because we kind of got away from that stretch a little bit. I still did it now and then, but I
can remember coming in there at Mach 3 and
basically the only way to pull in there and stop is you got to tell whoever's fishing with you, you got to say, look, we're going to come by so fast. Your only job is to jump out of the boat and hold on to it as we go by.
Right.
And it was somewhat of a rodeo.
Grab onto some willows and hope the boat stays put.
Yeah. And meantime, it's probably one of the fastest stretches. It kind of turns into a chute right there. And if you miss the takeout there, I'm not sure what those
rodeo
rapids are called.
Rapids.
But it's definitely something I wouldn't want to tackle.
No, it's kind of a gnarly little rapid right below there, and the whitewater folks like to do it, but we try to avoid it with the fishing boats. So moving on down, just less than half a mile downstream between that Chambers Park takeout is the Eagle County Fairgrounds, where you can put a boat in, and kind of all through town. And through the fairgrounds, there's access for wade fishermen, and there's now access just below the fairgrounds where Brush Creek dumps in to the Eagle River. So I got to give the Eagle County Open Space Program a lot of credit, because they've done a very good job of opening up some water for us in the last few years, not only on the Eagle but also the Colorado River. But either way, at the Eagle County Fairgrounds, the next float section down is from the fairgrounds down to the town of Gypsum. And there's a couple different takeouts down in Gypsum now. The first one is not really an official takeout. It's about 8 miles below the fairgrounds at a restaurant called the Rittenhouse, which is right in town in Gypsum, and we'll use that sometimes. The next one is a couple miles downstream, just below the town of Gypsum, at a spot called Community Pit BLM Access. It used to be the town dump, and now it's a BLM access, where there's a kind of an unimproved dirt boat ramp, but it's fairly easy to get a boat out there. And going on downstream, maybe 3 more miles, there's now a new takeout called the Duck Pond Open Space, where they built a really nice big new boat ramp. There was never really any access down there before that boat ramp was put in. So that opens up, a much longer float or a couple of shorter floats through that stretch of river. And that's basically it for the Eagle River. But there's probably 35 to 40 miles of floatable water on the Eagle River now. There's a couple stretches you can't go through because of, the rapid that you mentioned. But yeah, 30 plus miles of floatable water. So it's a pretty cool trout stream. And we didn't really talk about fish from Wolcott to Eagle or Eagle to Gypsum, but I can jump back and just touch on that real quick. From Wolcott to Eagle, it's fairly similar to the upper river. It's a pretty even mix of brown trout and rainbows. You definitely have a shot at some larger fish down there that are starting to push over that 20-inch range. The numbers are still fairly high in there. One thing about that stretch that people should be aware of is after a big rainstorm, there's a couple of seasonal creeks that dump in just above Wolcott and just below Wolcott. One's called Alkali Creek, one's called Mill Creek. And after a big rainstorm, that can muddy that lower stretch of the river up. So it's just something to be aware of, because if it happens pretty quick, and it'll ruin your day of fishing. Moving down to Eagle to Gypsum, there's probably not as many fish per mile down there. It's a larger, kind of slower river, not as many rapids to worry about down there. The fish numbers probably aren't quite as high, but you definitely have a shot at a big fish. It's not uncommon to catch a brown trout down there that's pushing 5 pounds or even bigger in some cases. It's not something you can expect on every trip, but they're definitely there. I've seen some pictures of some browns that you've caught down there, Jay, and there's some big ones in there.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like the fish density goes down, but the size of fish definitely goes up. I wanted to bounce back to something you had said. I'm used to the takeout there in Gypsum. I forget what we call it. Is there a new takeout below that?
There is. That's that duck pond. It's an Eagle County open space access point that they opened it.
That's the one we always take out at, right?
No, this is the new one. The old one is the community pit BLM. That's where you drive down the little dirt road through the willows to the river. So I'd say about 3 miles downstream from that, there's now a new little Eagle County open space boat ramp down there. It's great. It's got plenty of parking and a cement ramp, and it flows through that kind of slow, froggy water below Gypsum, where the river bottom gets a little sandy and silty down there. But it's definitely going to be worth exploring because it flows through primarily private land, and there's not a lot of fish per mile down there, but every now and then you'll hear a rumor of a 30-inch brown being caught out of that stretch. And
well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not too far from the confluence with the Colorado.
It's right there.
Now, would that still be would that still be upstream from Dotsero?
Yeah, you're just upstream from Dotsero, not very far. It's probably a mile or so above the confluence with the Colorado right there at Dotsero.
Okay. And then just out of curiosity, Brody, could you potentially put in there, float down to the confluence of the Colorado, and is there any place to take out on the Colorado, say, in that froggy water kind of before it gets to Bear Ranch?
You would have to go all the way to Bear Ranch. There's not really any way to get a boat out before Bear Ranch, because you're floating through private land, so there's nowhere to drag the boat out. So you'd have to go all the way down to Bear Ranch. And we've occasionally done that Bear Ranch stretch in the fall, and caught some big fish in there, but there's just not a lot of fish in there. The water gets warm in the summertime, and there's just the habitat isn't quite what you want to see.
Sure. Going back to, let's talk about the walkway fishing, say, from the confluence of Gore Creek down to, let's say, STP at the town of Edwards. You mentioned that there's quite a bit of public access there. What do you see as when the runoff is kind of over and we get into normal summer fishing conditions? What do you see as flies and patterns to use that would be optimal for fishermen that might be coming to the area? Like, what are the go-to flies maybe for that stretch of river?
For that stretch of river, you're probably not going to start wading it until it gets. That's a tough little stretch to wade in there because the water moves pretty quick in there, and there's a lot of big boulders and stuff. So you're probably going to want to wait to wade fish that until the river gets down to below 700 CFS, somewhere in there. Otherwise, it's just too hard to get around in there, and that's probably going to happen around, I don't know, early to mid-July. And up there, the bug life's pretty good. So you're looking at primarily caddis as the mainstay hatch, and that July caddis is a tan-colored caddis that generally ranges from a size 12 at the beginning of the hatch down to maybe a size 18 towards the end of the summer. So the flies aren't anything, that we're trying to keep a secret. It's standard stuff. Soft tackle hare's ear nymphs, soft tackle pheasant tail nymphs are good for the emerger patterns. And as far as dry fly go, we like tan stimulator, tan elk hair caddis, stuff like that. It's really it's not anything out of the ordinary as far as flies for that caddis hatch goes. Mayflies, you're going to see some PMDs, pale morning duns, start hatching. Usually in mid-July, they're going to show up, and they start out as about a size 16, and they'll get smaller fairly quick down to a size 18. And a pretty interesting thing about the pale morning duns in our area is they're a very orangish, pinkish color, and in a lot of places when you go to buy pale morning duns, you'll see a very pale yellow colored fly pattern. So it's something to keep in mind for our PMDs, is that they're more of a pinkish color. So we like an orange parachute. A fly called the Patriot is a really good one. Those are probably the two big hatches for the summer. Occasionally you'll see some green drakes on the upper Eagle River. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, that hatch hasn't really panned out for us the last few years. I'm not sure what's going on with it, but they're definitely still up there. So it might be worth carrying, a few green drake patterns. And it's always a good idea, if you're going to be dry fly fishing up there, to carry some small attractor patterns like a PMX, Royal Wolf, stuff like that. And that'll cover you up there in the summertime.
And then as you move down from, say, STP or the public put in there, the town of Edwards, where the main float is down to Climbing Rock, do the patterns change at all, or is there anything?
Not really. The caddis hatch is the big one again, and that's going to start anywhere from mid-June to early July, depending on how runoff shakes out. Those bugs will start hatching as soon as that river starts to drop and warm up a little bit, which hopefully will be in the next 10 days or so. Those bugs will start hatching. And so it's primarily caddis, PMDs, stuff like that. A little later in the float season, we'll see some trichos. We don't really mess around with those too much because they're so small. And it's just not the right kind of water on the Eagle River to fish tricho dry flies. So for fishing tricho dries, you need much slower, flatter water, and we just don't have that on the Eagle.
Yeah, and for the listeners out there, I mean, the Eagle River, primarily the stretches we're talking about, the upper stretches for sure, it's a lot of pocket water, a lot of fast-moving little runs, and, it's a pretty action-packed float, as you could probably attest, Brody. I mean, there's not areas where you get big, long drifts. A lot of it's, 8 or 10 feet, pockets, and then you're lifting up and recasting.
Definitely. And that's what makes it so fun for me as a guide or a fisherman, is it's fast-paced and the rowing is technical. It's not a float that a beginner wants to jump on. But it's very fun fishing, and if you can hit the spots, it's some of the best dry fly fishing you can expect to find in Colorado during the month of July.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen it too, where the fish aren't necessarily picky because they don't have a lot of time to look at it. Yes, you have to have the right size and the right pattern, but if you get it pretty close, you don't have to nail it specifically. You mainly just have to hit the pockets with good casts.
Yeah, and a good tip for the caddis hatch specifically is a lot of fly fishermen have been taught that a dead drift is the key to catching fish. And during that caddis hatch, one of the most important things you can do to up your catch is to actually move your fly around a little bit. When you watch those caddis flies hatching and laying eggs, those bugs are moving around on the water. And so a little bit of drag or a skitter on the surface with your dry fly is going to get a little bit of attention from those fish in the Eagle. They tend to like a little bit of movement. It's not necessarily a secret I want everyone to know, but I'm happy to share it here. It's definitely something to keep in mind, that a little bit of drag on your fly isn't going to kill you. It might actually improve your odds of catching more fish.
So my 40 million listeners, that you're gonna shake your head and wonder why you said that, right?
Yeah, I'm hesitant to even talk about the Eagle itself, because it's such a great little stream that doesn't get the attention it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, it is a spectacular river for sure. And while we're talking about that stretch, it might be important to note that the float on the Eagle sometimes, and most of the time, is a fairly short season. I mean, it doesn't last long. Can you talk about that specifically?
Yeah, we usually, in a normal, let's say we have a normal snowpack year, and the snow runs off, at the time that it normally does, which there is no normal anymore, it seems like. We usually actually get 2 float seasons on the Eagle, and one is a pre-runoff float that's generally going to occur as the lower elevation snow melts in March. We'll get a short 2 to 4 week season in April, sometimes into early May. And then the big water comes when it starts to warm up, which didn't really happen this year because of the cool, wet weather we had in May. But generally speaking, in a normal summer, you're going to start floating the Eagle around June 20th. It might be a week later than that, but usually by June 20th, we're starting to get on it and do some float trips. And if you get 4 to 5 weeks out of that river, that's a pretty good float season on the Eagle. Last year, we were very fortunate to get almost 7 weeks on the Eagle, which was great. But it is a pretty short, sweet float season, and that's why, as far as guiding goes, I am on that thing every day that it's floatable in the summer.
Yeah, and one of the beautiful things too, I think, is since it is such a short season, it actually gives those fish a lot of break.
Yeah.
There's a lot of areas that don't get fished, and I think that's why when it is floatable, it is very good, because there's a lot of stretches where the fish really don't get a lot of pressure. And how do you think the season this year with the conditions, and I know it's hard to predict, but being a 16-year veteran in the Valley, what do you see this year as far as what's going on with the runoff, and will it extend the float season, or just how do you see it shaping up?
I kind of think we're just going to get an average float season, a 4 to 5 week float season is what I'm thinking and what I'm hoping. We were really sweating bullets in March because we didn't have a lot of snow, and it was 70 degrees, and it was looking like a repeat of 2012. And then in May, we didn't see the sun for a month, and it rained every day, and it was snowing up high, so it kind of bailed us out. And everybody now is like, what's going on with the high water? Well, it's really not. In the grand scheme of things, it's really not that high, and the timing is about what it normally is. It's just everything was delayed a little bit, and now we're getting a peak a little later than we might normally get. But I think that we're just going to get that kind of average 4 week season. And the weather forecast for the summer is they're saying it's going to be an El Nino summer, and that it's going to be a cooler, wetter summer, and that could extend that float season in a big way, and I hope that's what happens, because in years when we get those monsoon rainstorms in July, it can really extend that float season. The river will stay low, but it'll stay floatable, and that's the ideal situation, because once that river gets to a certain level, a lot of guys kind of get off of it and start hitting the Colorado River, because it becomes a pretty technical row when it gets low. But that's when I like it, is when it's low and there's no other boats out there.
Well, it seems like too, at the lower it gets, the more pockets that open up, the more fish become predictable in all the different pocket water, and it's an incredible fishery, because it's really unlike any river I've fished, as far as, because going down the river as the water is dropping, over the weeks, you start to see new rocks and new pockets and holes that open up, and it's it seems like there's a fish behind every rock. And then there's days too when you think there's not a fish in the river.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes it such an interesting river to float fish, is how it changes from high water to low water, because you're when it's really high, you're trying to hit a 6-inch strip of slower water along the bank, and as it drops, there's more and more spots to throw to. And at the very end of the season, you could be fishing a pocket right in front of the boat out in the middle of the river, and there's fish coming up to eat your dry fly in the middle of the river. So it's constantly changing, and it makes it a very interesting river to float fish. And kind of going back to the hatch thing too, a lot of guys will when it does get low, a lot of guys kind of bail off of it because the bug hatches taper off and they're not seeing rising fish, so they assume the fish aren't going to eat dry flies. And that's actually one of my favorite times of the year to be out there, because the fish will still come up and eat dry flies. You're not necessarily mimicking a hatch. You're throwing small attractor dry flies like a little PMX or an ant or something like that. And it's a very fun time of year to fish. You're not necessarily casting to a fish that you're seeing rising. You're just casting to spots and hoping that that fish comes up and eats. And they will come up and eat dry flies, even though there's not any bugs hatching.
Sure. Brody, in speaking specifically about that STP to Climbing Rock stretch, I think we would need to note for sure there is a major rapid there, Trestle Rapid, which, always riding with Giannis, I kind of took it for granted a little bit. I used to video, and Jean would fish through the stretch, crazy. She just fished through the stretch, but I would video. And, after I started rowing, I started appreciating that rapid quite a bit more. Any advice for people on that? Or
if you haven't done it with an experienced rower, it's not a good idea to just go out there and try it. And the rapid that you're talking about, Trestle Rapid, is about half a mile downstream from the town of Wolcott, where Highway 6 and 131 meet. We call it Trestle because it goes under an old train bridge there. You really got to be careful. That the toughest spots are the entrance and the exit to that rapid, and it's fairly long rapid. It's several hundred yards long. So going into it, you really got to pull away from the right wall, kind of keep your nose pointed at that right wall, and then there's a little kind of pyramid-shaped rock you got to squirt by on the left. Once you get past that thing, the safest way to row that rapid is to stay on the left side of the river as much as you can. The main hazards are on the right for most of the rapid, and then at the very exit of the rapid, where there's a little kind of pour over and shoot, there's a big rock on your left that you got to avoid as well. But it's a technical rapid, and anyone that doesn't have a lot of rowing experience shouldn't attempt it on their own without someone experienced in rowing that rapid in the boat. And one thing we didn't even really mention about float fishing the Eagle is a raft-only river. We do not row drift boats on it. I've seen a couple of jokers put drift boats in at the treatment plant over the years, and both times I've seen it, those guys ended up sinking their drift boats in Trestle Rapid. So
it's definitely a raft only, and I can attest that that Trestle Rapid, the first time I rode it, I actually made I believe it was my wife, get out of the boat and walk down, and boy, the first time I did it, I was sure puckered. And that you talk about staying river left. I've seen other guys float down in that rock at the very bottom. That gets them because they stay left, and then that rock seems to pull you, and then they're too late. And
right.
Giannis always did that trick where he'd go by it, and then he'd pull the left oar in right when he goes by it. And I found that that's a pretty slick way to do it.
That is, tucking that oar. You can get pretty close to that rock. You just don't want to pancake it. The closer you get to that thing, the easier the exit out of that rapid is. But you got to make a quick move and shift that oar and tuck it away from the rock. And trestle really isn't the only technical stuff on that river. There's a lot of little spots where you can get in trouble if you don't have rowing experience. Trestle is just kind of the main big long rapid through that stretch. So it definitely keeps you on your toes as a rower.
Absolutely. And then as we move down from Climbing Rock down to the town of Eagle, one thing I've noticed is it seems like it seems like there's a little, as you keep going down, it seems like there's less fish, and it seems like those fish at times can get a little more technical. I don't know if it's just my experience or if it's just less fish, so it feels more technical.
Yeah, it certainly can get that way. I'm not sure why it is, but it seems like as you go further downstream, the less reliable the dry fly fishing is. I think those fish are still eating. They're just bigger fish that maybe don't want to come up and eat on the surface, and they're happy down there eating nymphs. And that's especially true between eagle and gypsum. The dry fly fishing's not as dependable down there. I'm not sure why the river gets a little moodier downstream, because the upper river, in all honesty, probably gets more pressure. So you think those fish would be a little trickier, but they like to eat dry flies better up there. So it's just kind of one of those personality things about the Eagle River that you might have to do a little nymphing on those lower stretches to catch fish.
Yeah, or streamers.
Yeah.
That lower stretch from Eagle to Gypsum, it seems like, maybe later in the summer, kind of right before the float fishing ends there, maybe large like Chernobyl ants and stuff with a beadhead dropper of some sort. I have very rarely seen them come up for dries, and it's kind of crazy. How that lower river just seems like it's ideal for streamers and, big stonefly nymphs and just kind of, quote unquote trashier type of fishing.
Right.
But,
right.
It's definitely a river that each stretch has its own unique characteristic.
Oh yeah. It's like completely different rivers when you look at it down in Gypsum as opposed to up in Edwards. It's like fishing two different streams.
And it's an incredible fishery, and I know Vail Valley anglers. You guys have great guides. I want to talk to you a little bit about gear that you use. What kind of raft are you floating?
Yeah.
What kind of rods you like? Reels? Waders? Just talk to me a little about what you use.
Yeah, the standard kind of boat setup on the Eagle is usually a 13-foot raft. You'll see a lot of Air Super Pumas out there, NRS Otters. I just picked up a new boat called the Rocky Mountain Raft. They're all pretty similar designs, and they have an aluminum fishing frame on them. The rower sits in the middle, fisherman up front, fisherman in the back, and that's really the ideal boat for the Eagle River. And I actually use that boat for all of my fishing because a raft can go anywhere a drift boat can, and they can go a lot of places that a drift boat can't go. So that's kind of the program I run. As far as boats go, fishing gear, pretty standard stuff. Anywhere from we use 9-foot rods, generally speaking. And in that 4 to 6 weight range. A 4 weight on the upper river is kind of nice for throwing dry flies. A 6 weight's great if you're going to be doing slinging some lead, and big stonefly nymphs like you were mentioning, and nymphing or throwing streamers. Most of my clients just kind of split the difference and roll with a 9-foot 5-weight rod, because you can pretty much do anything with that rod. So that'll cover you as far as fly rods go. Leaders and tippet, we're generally running the start of the season when the water's high. I'll run a 3X leader and 4X tippet. By the end of the season, you might be down to a 5X leader and 6X tippet.
Fluorocarbon or regular?
If you're nymphing, fluorocarbon I think is an advantage. Dry fly fishing, it can actually hurt you because fluorocarbon sinks, so it'll drag small dry flies under the surface. And one thing I don't like about fluorocarbon is that stuff does not break down in nature. So if you throw a piece of fluorocarbon tippet on the ground, it's going to be there 100 years from now. Whereas mono will eventually break down. Not that you want to throw that on the ground either, but
I didn't know that.
Fluorocarbon
that's a good point.
is pretty wild stuff. It'll never break down in nature.
Okay.
So we want to pick it all up off the ground.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of the standard tippet range. It's nothing special really. I tend to prefer shorter leaders on the Eagle, 7.5-foot leaders. That might be just because I'm guiding and I want my clients to be able to turn that leader over and get it close to the bank quickly. It wouldn't hurt you to use a 9-foot leader on the Eagle. There's really no need for a long 12-foot leader that I've ever seen. So again, pretty standard stuff as far as gear goes. I don't know if you have any other gear items you wanted to talk about.
Do you have like specific wading boots that you guide in, or wading sandals? What are you rolling these days?
I pretty much only float guide, so I'm not wading around a whole lot. So I just use a pair of Chaco sandals. They're comfortable. And one of the reasons I do that is so my feet so they aren't wet all day long. I don't like having a pair of wading shoes or boots on where your feet are just soaking in that neoprene and getting wet and swampy all day long. I want them to periodically dry out. So I use a pair of sandals. But one reason people may not want to do that is the Eagle is a tough, slick river to wade. And so if you're wearing sandals and you're getting in and out of the boat, there's definitely a chance you're going to bang up your ankles or your toes. So a closed toe shoe might be a better option. Maybe a pair of those Keens that actually wrap up over your toes might be better. So that's definitely something to consider as far as wading gear goes. If you're going to be floating and getting out of the boat to wade fish, and there's plenty of spots you can do that, then you're probably going to want to go with an actual wading boot because, like I said, the Eagle is a tough river to wade fish, and not having a good solid boot that has, felt or some of that newer grippy rubber on the bottom. If you don't have that, you're going to be stumbling around out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to have sure footing for sure. Well, Brody, it's been awesome talking to you this morning. I want to give you a chance. How can people find you? I recommend giving Brody a call if you want to do a guided trip on the Eagle or the Colorado or anywhere in the Vail Valley. How do people get a hold of you, Brody?
They can get in touch through the shop in Edwards, Colorado, and the Riverwalk Center, either through the website, which is vailvalleyanglers.com. And there's a little guide bio page, and you can check me out there. Or you can talk to the guys directly at the shop. The number is 970-926-0900. And you can book a trip that way. We have a lot of other great guides, so if I'm not available, we'll get you hooked up with someone else.
That sounds great. And I wanted to finish our conversation. I know your dad had harvested I know you're a hunter as well, yep. And your dad harvested a really nice buck a couple years ago, and just wanted to get a short hear it from you and just hear a short story on that.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. My old man had been out to hunt Colorado a few times and had shot a couple smaller bucks during muzzleloader season, and I really wanted to get him a big buck, and I didn't have the sweet tag that year, and he did. So we hunted for a few days, and I think the 4th or 5th day of the season, in the evening, we glassed up a real nice buck, but we didn't have time to make a move on him. The light was pretty low, and I thought he was somewhere in that 180 range, in which my dad would have been very stoked with. And we found the buck the next morning, and actually almost got too close to him moving in. He ended up shooting this buck at about 70 yards. And as soon as I saw the buck falling over, I knew it was way bigger than 180. And we walked up to it, and it was an impressive old buck, super heavy, wide, couple of long kickers on it, and it ended up scoring 209, I think it was.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a super cool buck. And my dad really didn't know what he had until we got that deer home, and I pulled a 170-inch European mount off my wall and stuck that thing inside the antlers of his buck. And then he kind of realized how special that deer was. A do-it-yourself hunt on public land. And, that's another great thing about this area is we've got some good hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a great story. And do you have any hunts that you've drawn or anything coming up that you're looking forward to this fall?
I drew a North Park antelope tag over by Walden, which should be a pretty cool hunt. It's a muzzleloader hunt, and the Division of Wildlife actually changed the structure of the muzzleloader season for antelope. It used to fall after rifle season in late October, and they actually switched it so it's now before rifle season. So I'll get to chase some of those antelope over there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's over in Scotty Graham
exactly.
country.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so
Scott's going to be on the podcast here in a few days. Scott's going to be on the podcast, so I know you two are friends. Well, that's awesome that you have an antelope hunt to look forward to, and I know you're really looking forward to this fishing season, as am I, and I look forward to seeing you out on the river, and I just appreciate you being with us today.
Yeah, no problem. I'll see you out there on the Eagle, probably on the Roaring Fork too.
All right, buddy. Sounds good. You take care.
All right, thanks a lot.
Well, that was a great episode with Brody Henderson of Vail Valley Anglers talking about the Eagle River. I can't wait for the Eagle to come down and get up there and do some floating on it and catch some nice fish. Should be a good dry fly season this July. I'm over here in the Roaring Fork Valley, and the Roaring Fork is really blown out. The crystal's blown out. It's just a mud season, and look forward to these rivers coming down. It'll be interesting to see how the green drake hatch is affected with these high flows. But I'm betting it'll be, July 1st, the fishing will be on and we'll be floating, and look forward to that floating season. I want to thank you guys for listening to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. You guys have been phenomenal with your support. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to email me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. Get constant support and messages each day from you guys, and I just really appreciate that. We've got great episodes coming up all summer long, and I just appreciate your support. You can follow along at jscottoutdoors.com. You can follow along on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram, it's at jscottoutdoors. My associate, Dar Colburn, you can follow him at Dar Colburn on Instagram. Our Facebook page is jscottoutdoors. My personal Facebook page is J. Scott. We have a YouTube channel that is very well received. We've got, 1,000,005 views and 1,500 subscribers or so. So check that out. I just thank you guys for listening, and until next time, God bless. Thanks for listening to the J. Scott Outdoors Western Big Game Hunting and Fishing Podcast, brought to you by GoHunt.com Insider. Research faster, hunt more. Go to gohunt.com/insider and join today.